Hello, welcome to episode 22 of the Hybrid Ministries Tech Forum, where we discuss all matters relating to the challenges and opportunities of live streaming worship services and any events happening from your congregation, and how congregants will experience worship may be different going forward, whether they are in the sanctuary or at home. Whether you're considering a one-way broadcast or an interactively engaging worship, the most important thing to keep in mind is your congregation's experience, your congregants' experience, because while they may come for the community, the message, the music, you want them engaged enough so that they'll stick around long enough to hear it, right? So whether you're with us live or playing this back at a later time, welcome. If you're with us live on Zoom or YouTube, you can contribute to the show with questions and comments on our Discord. There's a category named Live Show with questions, channels under it named Live Questions for July 29th and Live Chat. We don't use Zoom's chat feature, except you'll find a link to register for the Discord so you can jump on it. If you want to invite other people to the show, you can find the Zoom and Discord registration information on our Facebook page, where we also post upcoming messages and episodes. If you're with us live on Zoom, you can stick around after we're done and participate in the post-show, where we'll have casual conversation with open microphones. Now, we are here on the Hybrid Ministries Tech Forum. We are a growing international and multi-faith community representing congregations of all sizes and faiths. For the topics we discuss here, denomination is pretty transparent. We all want to communicate with our communities and do it as effectively as possible. And so we're here to help each other up our game. And we're just one in a related set of communities that our panelists and I contribute to on a weekly basis or so, dedicated to all flavors of media production. So if you're hungry for more, look for links in the Discord under related shows. And there's even more. Media production, even for church, is a rich and deep area of interest and study. You can learn one way of doing things, or you can learn multiple ways, which offers you creative opportunities to improve your results, enrich your personal satisfaction, and make your work more interesting, and make your church more interesting. So we have multiple training programs for you. Audio training it continues throughout the summer on an occasional basis, and will become more comprehensive next season when we'll work on skills for mixing, music, listening, how to listen, and editing. They happen at 3 o'clock Eastern Time with Mark Plukas and myself on Mondays, right here on this Zoom channel. And Joanna Lovell does an Audacity training on Tuesdays. You can contact her on the Discord for that information. Also for next season, we're planning to offer workshops on creative video switching and camera techniques, as well as on-camera presence. And there are some other things that we'll be working on that we'll talk about at an appropriate time. So check out the training announcements channel in the Discord. Now, it's these interactive engagement opportunities on Discord during the post-show in our training classes that really makes this community work. The more you participate, the more everyone benefits. Possibly for the first time, an international community of church tech people is so accessible to you. So engage with others watching the show, enjoy the information being shared, ask questions, and any day of the week you'll get good and reliable answers. You'll also find future show agendas, links to past show recordings, and special announcements. Now for July and August, we're on a bi-weekly schedule, so we'll be on again in 2 weeks. So before we get into today's topic, I want to thank our panelists today. We have Mark Plukas in Massachusetts, Leo Mindell in London. We have special guest, Sharon Culata from Simcoe Technology in Maryland. And let's see. Now, I know that there are a lot of people watching today who are both knowledgeable and dedicated to working with worship technology. So if you would like to contribute to panel discussions like we're going to have today, All you have to do is get here between 6 o'clock and 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time on Thursdays, 30 to 60 minutes before the show starts, and join in. Join the pre-show conversation, stick around to join the panel, or you can just join us for the pre-show discussion. And at 6:40, we finalize the panel and everybody else is in listen mode. So today, as we think through how to present an interactive worship experience that engages the attendees in the room as well as those at home, we have to think about our on-camera presence and engaging with cameras. And it becomes unavoidable to think about large screen displays in our sanctuaries. Once we've accepted that, then we become free to think about the many other creative ways that we can utilize them, even beyond showing hymn lyrics. So, what are congregations using these displays for? Let's kick off the discussion with that. What are the different things that large screen displays can be used for in the sanctuary? Some of them are obvious, like hymn lyrics. Anybody else?
We're displaying a full Zoom meeting as a duplicate display off of a single PC. So just a gallery view of 25 people.
Right, absolutely. That's one of the ways that the two different congregations can acknowledge each other and greet each other, is to show the people who are on Zoom in a gallery view in the sanctuary, and maybe turn the cameras around so that people at home can see that there are people in the pews, in the seats, when they come back, of course. All right, anything else?
So if we go back before this time, a lot of churches that I've worked with have used the large screens to be displaying parts or supporting information for their sermons, and and bringing in videos that are related to maybe where they've got people who are on missionary work.
I agree. I think that they're getting more dynamic with presentation. It's not just being used for song lyrics and things of that nature and scriptures. It's also being used. They're pulling videos off of YouTube, creating their own content, and they want everyone to be able to interact with them and with that content. So it's not just being used for the traditional sense. They're using it live as well to bring in content.
Yeah, there are a lot of, so we know from, we've seen some more creative virtual services use imagery from slides and imagery from video of streaming waters, waterfalls, skies, different kind of mood enticing images, whether they be still images or video images, that can meld very well with the reading or the sermon or the theme for the month. These are really creative ways to use them, whether they have text over them, whether you use them behind hymn lyrics, even interspersed in between all the announcement slides. They're very creative that way. So what kind of size would these displays be? We have, anything from 42-inch flat panels to 85-inch flat panels. We have projection screens that could be almost any size. And, if your church is large enough, you may even think about multiple screens. So how do we know what size screen would be appropriate?
There's a lot of factors for that. I mean, there's so many factors for it. How big is the area? A lot of times we have trouble putting projection screens and or flat panel displays in a house of worship setting, because where do you put them? They're built a certain way. You can't always fly or drop a screen. In the same sense, you can't always install a video wall, because it really depends on the area and the space you have to put it in, which comes back to you mentioning that sometimes you need multiple screens. A lot of times we're going to see dual screens, because obviously you want that center separate. There's a lot of different reasons for the size, and unfortunately sometimes you can't always put the size that you want, in comparison to the number of viewers and how far back they are from the screen. You might like to do it one way, but you can't always do it. And that speaks to what kind of technology you choose depends specifically on that specific building, because it's a tough install. And you can't always get what you want. You might need a screen or a display this size, but your setting isn't always going to allow you to do that.
That's right. Available wall space can be a limiting factor. Available wall space can be a limiting factor. I thought I'd turn that off. For a flat screen in particular, because you need to have a place to mount it that's secure. You have to have the wall space that is at least as big as the screen is. And it has to be at the right angle so that people can see it. Projection screens have a bit more leeway because they can span over an archway. They could be mounted in a few different ways, that because they have a bar that can be suspended, they have a little bit more leeway in where they can be mounted and how, and they can be motorized to drop down so that they're not always visible. But here's the thing: if we're gonna put up slides that have text on them, how big does that text need to be in order for someone, say, in the back row, to be able to read it? That's actually a subject that has been taken up by a few different standards organizations, SMPTE being one of them. There are a couple of them, actually. And there are formulas. So given the distance to the back row from the screen, and this is one of the formulas, they use the smallest text available, which would be, say, lowercase text. It would need to be a certain height given the distance to the back screen. So, for example, we did one for a sanctuary that's 60 feet deep. So the back row is 60 feet away. The smallest text would have to be 3 inches high. And so you need to be able to scale your text to that. And everything else needs to fall in line. So uppercase text would have to be bigger than that, but the smallest text has to be 3 inches. And then when you have that, you need to figure out how much horizontal space you need to get a whole line of text. So there's some scaling that goes on. Another formula that I've seen is that the maximum viewing distance should be no more than 2 times the height of the screen. So what's interesting about this is that there's a rule of thumb called the 4-6-8 rule, because the kind of images that you're showing on the screen don't need to have the same resolution. It doesn't take as much acuity of the eye to see a moving video image like film, right, as it does to read text. So to see video, you can have the farthest seat being, say, 8 times as high as the screen is. So take the height of the screen, multiply it by 8. That's as far as the last seat can be. If you're going to be showing graphics like graphs and things, it can be 6 times the height of the screen. But if you're going to be showing text that people need to read, then this rule of thumb at least is 4 times the size, 4 times the height of the screen. So there are different ways of looking at it depending on how critical you're going to be, but it's important to know that there are some standards out there that you can look to for guidance on how big the screen should be. And that would go for flat screens or projection screens. So are there any other ways that we can evaluate which would be better, a flat screen or a projection screen?
You can take into account what kind of resolution you're looking for. Screen and projector technology, you can go up to 8K, future-proof. You can still display in anything you want currently. You can get that in displays, but not very easily if you're building an ultra-narrow bezel wall. You're going to definitely struggle more with resolution. They have great contrast, however, but resolution is always something to consider. And size.
You need to consider maintenance on the projector. Granted, with lasers these days and whatnot, the maintenance cycle has been stretched considerably. When it was lamps, it was an expensive lamp very frequently. Now they last a lot longer, but there is always the consideration of it's not just the screen you're hanging. There's a projector to project on that screen. Where is that going to hang? Is it an accessible location for maintenance? Things like that. You're going to need to consider whether you're going to use the factory provided remote or a control system to turn it on and off. So the neat thing about using a projection screen over a dedicated display is, again, going back to the wall space thing, a projection screen can go away. A display really can't unless you want to invest a lot of money in a motorized lift for that display, whereas a picture sheet rolls up and down and goes into a small box, a relatively small box comparatively. So you don't obstruct as much, you don't permanently obstruct as much of the architecture with a projection screen. So there's trade-offs on all of it. I would say try and determine what it is you intend to do with it. Again, as you pointed out, Marty, what's going to be on that screen? Is it going to be look and feel emotional stuff, or is it going to be text that has to be read and understood, like for your annual board meetings and whatnot? When you're having your annual meeting and the budget needs to go up there for the congregation to vote on, now you talk, do you want people to look at that, or are you going to hand out paper for them to look at? So you balance all of this stuff. I would always recommend that people find the most critical view that they're anticipating and at least go one step up from that, because once people get used to it, they're going to want to do more than they thought. So always try and future-proof just a little bit. Future-proofing a lot in this arena can get pricey very quickly. So once you've determined what it is you're trying to do, look at the available wall space to cover the entire space. If you don't have that, you think about distributed video, which could be a projection screen at the front with repetition monitors on columns going back so that people have local viewing. So it isn't necessarily an either or thing. It can be a mixed media installation.
That's true. You don't necessarily have to have one large screen at the front of the room. You can distribute them. So I want to welcome to the show for the first time, friend of ours, Omar Kalom, who is the mastermind behind another web presence, because it's pretty omnipresent with all kinds of platforms, of AV Educate and the AV Tech Talks. Hey, welcome, Omar.
Hey, thanks for the introduction. I appreciate that. Sorry to jump in last minute here. I had some rain well, it's Florida, right? I had some rain, power went out for a second, so it's a little late, but yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, I try not to dive into AV Educate when I'm on other people's shows, so I don't know what I can and can't say here, and I don't want to distract from what the topic is.
Oh, we're a friendly bunch.
Cool. Yeah. So if you guys haven't heard of AV Tech Talks, we do a similar setup where the Zoom meeting, we have a little bit of interaction stuff going on similar to this, and we talk about gear, and the presenters are you, the audience, essentially gets to interact, ask Q&As live to our sessions for the AV Tech Talks. We find volunteers essentially who want to talk on the show, learn about projects educate people on gear that they use for their particular scenario. And then there's this live Q&A aspect of it. There's a little beforehand pre-show for backstage and afterwards to have a kind of offline talk as well. And you guys have 2 hours to kind of just teach what you know, your method, your kind of signature stuff of how you do things. And then from there, we ask questions and kind of dive in deeper. And that allows a level playing field between the new guy and the experience, because the experience will have more technical questions versus the new guys always want to learn more surface. Audio is always obviously a hard topic because yeah, you guys have been there. Mics start talking, that's an hour right there. Signal flow starts to happen, that's a whole nother hour section there. So anyways, but the goal is to focus on you. You're the presenter. We do everything we can on the back end to make the show fun and inviting, and all you have to do is show up and do what you do best. So.
And where we focus on church tech, mostly you have a broader audience, everywhere from professionals to novices to beginners.
100%.
Great.
Yep. I mean, we've also brought in Central Control. We brought them in when they were new. Kind of brought. I wouldn't say we brought him to the market, but we brought attention to his product, and a lot of people have gotten that. Same thing with a couple other guys. We did some stuff with Stream Deck directly with them. Did some stuff with Companion directly. Have a couple things in the line right now with Coyote, which is a newer playback media server that came out a couple years ago, and then have a talk right now with. I'm going to butcher this name, Misho Systems, which is the camera tracker for all the XR stuff. We have a show coming up with them pretty soon. So we're always trying to, bring new stuff to the show to just get people to learn new things and kind of bring back the joy of what these conversations were at the beginning, right? Just learning and kind of experimenting and doing different things with different people.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned the Stream Deck. That's a hot topic right now. We're going to be doing an episode on that here too. And Sharon, let's give you some love. Let's give you some equal time here. Tell us more about yourself.
Who?
Sharon, you.
I thought you said me. I just wasn't sure. It was such a fast move. I've been in the industry for 27 years officially, but really grew up in the office. I currently work for Simco. We're turning 50 this year. I've been a manufacturer's rep most of my life. My father actually started Simco, and I was out west for over a decade as well. And we sell all kinds of technology. We've been always a traditional AV AV rep, but I'll tell you, this world is changing. I saw it change a lot 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago when SVSI brought encoding and decoding into this world. And I'm seeing it change more with more monitoring solutions and more software solutions. And I'm really happy to be part of it and still here doing this because it's very interesting to see how new technology is adopted by different vertical markets and how new technology fits into all of them just in a different way. And I love that. I think it's really exciting personally. So
yeah,
I'm a video
absolutely. It's amazing how quickly even the small to mid-sized churches who are our core audience have had to figure out and adopt some fairly high technology stuff to continue doing services to provide the community with worship opportunities and community opportunities during COVID. I mean, people had to adapt and pick it up just like that within less than a week's time. And it's not easy stuff to do. In fact, a lot of this technology didn't even exist very far before COVID hit. So we've been talking about large screen displays and the differences between and the choices between projection screens and flat panel screens. We talked about a little bit about how to choose what size screen you need. There are some reasons for choosing them.
Marty, before you step away from that, I'd like to point out a question that was in the list there from Kermit, is asking if there was a standard formula to determine legibility of text in various distances. That what effect would the font have on legibility, sans serif versus serif? I'd like to point out that if you just Google projection screen calculator and look at any of the major manufacturers, whether it's Draper, Daylight, Stewart, take a look at Projector Central, take a look at, there's any number of manufacturers and suppliers out there that have online calculators for all of this stuff. The projection screen sizes, as well as what size and brightness projector you should be using. There's a bunch of ways to go out there, poke in some numbers, and get some pretty reasonable things. Addressing the sans serif versus serif, the common wisdom is serifed fonts are always easier to read because the serifs give you clues about the shape of the letter, whereas when you peel the serifs off the letters, everything starts to look the same. Just like in publishing, you never do everything in all caps because words become rectangular blocks rather than the shape of the word. Most people read by word shapes rather than collecting all of the letters together. So serifs work in much the same way. There are some serifed fonts that are impossible to read, granted, but overall, serifed fonts do tend to work just a little bit better. That's been my experience anyway.
That's content, and the beautiful thing is if you get the solution that's going to work in your environment, content can be changed. So focus on resolution, size, brightness, the key things you need for your environment, and the content can be changed. You can fix that.
Just want to jump in. There's an app. If no one's, there's actually two, and I'm trying to Google the second one because I can't remember the name. But has anybody ever used an app called AV Buddy?
No,
So
I haven't
if you
seen that one.
So if you haven't seen it, AV Buddy, I just did an article on it recently and spoke with the developer. The guy's an interesting, very interesting gentleman. But he's on version, I guess, 3 at this point. He's had it for a couple of years now, probably 10 plus years almost. And it's in there. It's got the measurements for projectors. I mean, the lumens measurements, projector measurements, distance, heights, some stuff that's a little outdated now, but still relevant in industry. You can look at the chipset versus the projected image. So there's multiple ways and different math forms to do. And he's kind of put it in a app that's very easy to just plug and play with the numbers. So you put in your projector, you put in your distance, and it'll tell you what the screen size will be. You put in the screen size and the distance, tells you what your lens needs to be. So it's very... It's very user friendly. And there's another one I'll get in a second here from another gentleman who actually has a couple apps, different apps that he's created, and he works for Creative Technologies, and he's developed a suite of these apps. And a lot of guys use his app for the blending side of projectors because it's also got a built-in grid creator. So you put in your pixel count, and it sends you out a grid essentially. And you can do it different ways with colors, or you can do it with circles, so you can get right proportion stuff. So very useful. I use them a lot for what I do because I do a lot of projection stuff. So I highly recommend if you don't have it, at least get AV Buddy because it has a lot of stuff for video and for audio, so you can do dual stuff with it. And then just give me a second to find this other one. I can't remember the guy's name right now, but give me a second, I'll find it and I'll tell you guys what it's called. And that one's specifically just for projectors, and it does everything, including sends out a grid for you, which is also in your on your computer. You can do it. Sorry, computer or app. And he's also got another one, which is why he's interesting for LEDs, which I know we talked about earlier. He also has one for LEDs, and he's put in a lot of the name brand ones in there. So you put that name brand in there, you put in your width and your height, and then he'll spit out all the information for you, the power you need, the tiles, the pixel counts, all that stuff that you need for when you're doing LED walls.
Great. Yeah, there are a couple of things. I put a link in the Discord questions and chat. That'll bring you to a short video that is pretty well explains the eye acuity for text, the ability to read text, and explains that, and will point you to some other links or other sources of information for that. There was something that I had already. I'm just trying to find it.
So I'll give you a second to look for that. If you guys look up, or I just posted one of them right now, which is wikisoft.com. The first one is Blenzy, which is for projectors primarily, and we'll spit out that content. It's kind of got a little writing there. And the other one's called Fido LED, and that's also an app you can download. And I'll put that link right now there as well. And that's for LED walls. And both of these are super useful on the pre-production side. Highly recommend them. They make your job just that much faster because it's a lot of plug and play. So you when you do your site surveys, you take general measurements and stuff. You can take those, plug those numbers in, and then get everything else you need for the walls you're doing or for the projectors you're doing. It'll save you a bunch of time, I promise.
That'd be great. Thanks. Let's see. So, yeah, there are some studies now. I mentioned that the SMPTE organization, SMPTE, has some standards about text size and screen size that you can look up. And I will try to find those and put them in the Discord after the show. There are some other things that you can use. There are a whole bunch of calculators. Let me show you one. So this is one from Projector Central. And what you do is you find the projector that you're going to use. You enter it in here. There's a whole list of them. And then you can see your throw distance, which is the distance between the projector and the screen. You can see, you set the aspect ratio, whether it's going to be a 16 by 10 screen, a 16 by 9 screen, a 4 by 3 screen. So 16 by 9 is standard high definition. 16 by 10 is a little bit taller image and can be handy sometimes to use. A lot of flat screen monitors for desktops are 16 by 10 versus 16 by 9. You can determine the image size based on the size of the screen. And there's a lot of graphics that are automatically calculated by the parameters that you set up top. So if we look at this and we say, we're going to use a standard lens and it's going to be a 16 by 9 screen, and the screen itself is going to be 120 inches in diagonal, right? And if you want to know what the width and height is, you can just select these and it'll calculate that for you. Now, at that distance with that projector and that lens, you can see a lot of information here. You can see what the zoom range is for that lens. This will determine how far the projector can actually be from the screen and still fill the screen with an image, so that it's not too small and not too big. It also shows you what the brightness is going to be right here. So this is a very helpful thing, and there are others that are a bit more extensive that show more calculations and more images. And this one actually has a simple mode and an advanced mode. It's very advanced, I promise you. There it is. That can, you can move the screen around on the wall. You can do lots of different adjustments. And this is something that an installer would use to determine exactly how far the screen can be. A lot of these projectors, especially when they get over 7,000 lumens, you have the ability to select what lens you want to use. And so the farther you are away, the farther the projector is from the screen, the longer the lens will be, just like on a camera.
Marty, can you just explain, or can somebody just explain really quickly what a lumen is or how it relates?
Good question.
I don't know, that maybe to Sharon or Omar could just explain what's a good lumen, what's a bad, what are you aiming for?
Yeah, so I mean, I can get some generics on that. Obviously, what Marty just showed you guys is a great reference for that. But so there's factors to consider when you're doing projections, right? So if you're talking about, so something you would look for in a projector is when you're looking at resolution here, that's the pixel count, or I'm sorry, that's the chip size is what, sorry, we're talking about lumens. Let me stay focused here. Sorry. So we're talking about lumens here, right? So there's two factors that affect this. One is sunlight, obviously. You need at least 38,000 lumens essentially to affect sunlight. So that's what you do for outdoors. For indoors, you can do anything from a 5K projector to a 10K, depending on the lumens level of the room itself. And that's what the lights are. So when you go into a room, you take a light meter, you measure the room, and it gives you a reading. And that reading tells you how much light essentially is just ambient light that's in the room. You have a window that's out there, that's something that's going to affect your projected image. Usually a rule of thumb for me, for installations, I try to always go for a 10K projector if there's windows in a room, just because usually you can put some tints on there, and it gives a really bright image. If you can get the lasers have a very good contrast, right? So 1,000 to 1, you'll see this verbiage. The higher that ratio is to 1, the better contrast you get. And what that is the rods and cones in your eye is to be able to distinguish between black or brights and darks, essentially. So those are factors you want to consider as well. When it comes to lumens, there's another thing you want to dive into, and I'm trying to keep it simple, but the simple version is called square law theory. And what that is if you think of a light source, right? A light source is kind of think of the sun as a ball, right? So light goes out all directions. What projectors are doing is they're going through a prism, which then splits those colors, and they're forcing this source of light, which wants to do 360, to go into this rectangular shape to shoot out into a box, essentially, to go into your screens. And when that's coming around, every 2 feet you lose 4 lumens, and it gets times. So then 2 becomes 4, 4 becomes 8, and the farther that is, the more lumens you get. So then there's a factor which Marty was showing you guys. The further back the projector is from the screen, the lower the lumens levels are, and that's another factor that has to be considered. And again, what he was showing you there will factor most of that stuff in. Barco's got a very good one as well, which will give you a visualizer. So you could say if you had a 10K projector or 8K projector, 8Ks are a little more common, but 8K projector, and you were 20 feet away from the screen, let's say it's a 16 by 9 screen, you would lose X amount of lumens, and an image would look like this, and you can put in what the lumens are for the room. So these are some factors to consider when you're doing this stuff.
And
I
assume also what affects this, and Omar and Sharon, you probably know this, is that in churches, typically when you build a church, they've got big, bright windows. And that was how they were built, because you wanted to get as much light in as possible. And that must cause you a lot of problems in your installs.
And light shooting on the crucifix, which happens to be right in the middle of the 2 walls you want to put your displays on.
Yeah. So there's other small, minute factors, right? So if you're doing a lamp-based projector, which is a light source, whether it's a spark or a lamp, that also, the amount of lens shifting you're doing on that projector can also affect the final output of the projector. So there's a theory about it, a projector theory, and I can't remember the law right now, but essentially if you're at center, which projectors have a go to home button, you're getting 100% lumens coming out of that projector. The further you shift down or upwards, now that you're shifting that prism essentially, right, you're losing lumens. So if you go all the way to the edge of your lens, you probably lost about 30% of the actual output coming out of that projector. So that's another factor to consider. If you go to the laser route, because you have a higher contrast ratio, you get this better quality image. It doesn't affect it too much with lasers. And regardless, the image just looks better because it's a better contrast. Another thing to consider as well is when doing screens in a scenario where there is lights, fun fact, actually, I'll give you a fun fact. If you do a borderless screen versus a bordered screen, the advantage of a screen with a black border is that gives eyes a reference to what black is. So you are able to perceive better blacks, which will help your eye compensate more to the screen surface. If you do a borderless screen or just project onto the wall, the eye has no reference. So now that light really, when it hits and takes over, it really takes over because the eye has nothing to reference or contain that image in. Your eyes will do some things on their own that'll help you kind of adjust to see proper colors. But without a border, essentially, the mind doesn't have anything to reference it to. You're going to be affected by whatever's around that, like Sharon was saying with the lights. If you're too close to the lights that's being put onto the crucifix, that without a border, your eye has no way to distinguish between what should stop and what should be here. So it'll blend in, and that'll cause an extra. And again, these are little minute things that could help you in those tight spots where, okay. And then there's also consideration for screens. There's gray screens, there's white screens. I think it's daylight, or correct me if I'm wrong. There's a screen called a parallax, which is a black screen. So it produces very good images in those scenarios, but you also color becomes an issue, right?
And
you
you
have
lose your cone.
Yep, you lose your cone. It becomes a small, it's called angle of view on the screens. So there's also some things that screens can do to help you get more bounce back of your image. And so if you do a gray, you get less bounce back, but better contrast. You use the black one, you get better quality, but you lose your angle of view. So if someone's too far off, they won't see anything anymore. If you do a white screen, you get more bounce off, but then that's reflection going out. So now your luminance is going to hit that and come out, so you can gain something that you've lost. So usually the people go for the gray or that, depending on what the scenario is. These are all small factors that you can talk about with your installation crew, and they should be able to help you kind of give you the best options.
And you
So I
might
want
think,
to,
well, then why don't I just go with an ultra narrow bezel video wall? But they have inherent problems as well. Where do you hang them? Glare. Yep. I don't care if they're anti-glare. You're going to get glare.
100%.
And there are a lot of windows in. Don't worry about that anti-glare little thing. They're lying. You put up a bunch of bright windows, you're going to get a glare. Lots of things. Over time, they lose their colors. They go wonky on you, or one gets a little brighter than the other one. So whatever technology you have, there's going to be inherent small details and problems with. The same thing with projectors, like this gentleman said. I mean, you're going to give up something to gain something. There are great screens out there with ALR technology. They're going to give you a beautiful, beautiful picture, just as much contrast as you can get on a display. But if you use ALR, you can't use it in a room that's really, really wide. It'll fall off on the edges. So you're always giving up something to gain something. Again, it's going to matter. It depends on your specific house.
Yeah, so let me address that right now. So a screen is not a screen. A projection screen, there are many different kinds of screens. There are some, just like there are different brightnesses of flat panel monitors, a screen can come with something where the reflections can be stronger, can amplify the light. And that is called gain. When you look at the specs on a projection screen, you'll see a figure called gain, and it generally runs from a little bit under 1, so like 0.9, 0.85, to about 2, positive 2. A gain of 1.0 means that it's reflecting just as much light. The intensity of the light that's being reflected off the screen is equal to the amount of light that is incident or striking the screen. So, and the angle that everybody, so the viewing angle, so how wide is the front row of your room? The people that are nearest to the screen, how far off angle will they be? This is a chart that shows you the reflected brightness of an image depending on what angle you're looking at it. So at 0 degrees, you're looking straight at the lens. It will have maximum brightness. But as you go to the left or the right, the brightness will start falling off. And when it reaches half the brightness, that is considered what's called the viewing cone is the optimum viewing angles. So this particular screen has a gain of 1.3 and a viewing cone of 70 degrees, which means 35 degrees to the left, 35 degrees to the right. And you can see that at 35 degrees, right about here, it's about half, about 65.65, which is half of 1.3. So the maximum viewing angle that you would want to have for this screen would be 35 to the left and right. That's 70 degrees. Some screens can be as wide as 100, usable as wide as 180 degrees. So Omar mentioned white screens and gray screens and black screens, and Sharon mentioned ALR, which is ambient light rejecting screens. Now I want to play a video for you that is going to demonstrate this pretty effectively. Let me just get out of this and this and bring this back up. This one. Okay, so I'm going to share this screen. Hopefully you'll be able to hear this as well.
We don't have audio, Marty.
All right.
It's in your settings. It's weird.
I will check it out. All right, let me go back to Zoom here. And stop that share. Try it again. Share sound, optimize for video clip. You'd think I'd have this figured out by now, right?
Never.
Honestly, they Zoom probably changed something in the last update, so now who knows where it is in the submenus.
Exactly.
Yeah, who knows? All right, let me try this again.
No, no audio.
I mean, we could kind of talk over this if you want. I have some general
Yeah, well,
concepts
you know
of what
what?
he's doing.
Let me, all right, I'll narrate. So what we're seeing here is a white screen, and there's a grid being projected on the screen of bright green lines, vertical and horizontal lines, and you can see those. And the space in between the boxes, that's like no image, no white, no image at all. That's the maximum black. That's the blackest that image will show on that screen. The green lines are the brightest that projector can make on that screen. Okay. And so this is a white screen. Now, so there are lights all around this room, above and below and to the sides. And they're saying, he was saying that there's only 1.1 gain screen. There's about 23 lumens of light on this screen. So all from the overhead and side lights. And the difference between the square and the green lines are your contrast ratio. Now, when he rolls up the white screen and there's a black screen behind it, now you can see the difference between the blacks and the greens. The contrast ratio is so much higher. So in a lit room with a fairly low projector, this projector has only 800 lumens, so a fairly low powered projector. You can see the difference in the image quality between the ambient light rejecting screen and the white screen.
Yeah, it was night and day instantly, even
And
off the
now
video.
Now they make ALR screens that don't just, before they reflected from the right and the left, and now they reflect from all directions, which is really vital, specifically because of those lights that come down. And if you took a light and shined it down like at an angle on your screen, it really just absorbs in. You do need to be careful though with ALR screens on where you position your projector. You're not going to shoot at it from up to down because it's going to absorb the light. So you would need to shoot from the back of the room, for instance. So again, it's very handy and works very good. And I think that, honestly, I think it's screen technology that has made projectors more viable in this world today. I think projectors got a bad shake because of screens.
Right.
And now that they've increased and made better screens, better material, better made screens, and projectors, gotten rid of lamps and so forth. But I don't think we would have been able to use projectors as often as we do and should, frankly. I think they still get a bad name if screen manufacturers hadn't made better screen technology.
Yeah, absolutely. When you think about it, and I say this a lot to clients when I'm talking about projection screens, the screen is actually part of the lensing system of the projector. So the projector has an optical lens with glass on it. These screens have glass as well. Now, a typical white, less expensive screen is going to have little glass beads embedded in the surface. And these beads can reflect light that come from any angle, and they disperse that light in while it's reflecting it to all angles. So this is why a white screen can get really washed out, because any light coming from the windows, from lighting overhead, reflects off the screen into your eyes, and you can see it. These ambient light rejecting screens, these darker screens, they actually have multiple layers of optical technology that are like polarized sunglasses, right? They're polarizing. So they absorb or reject light coming from certain angles, like from the sides and from acute overhead angles, and they only reflect light coming from specific angles. So that would be from the projector. Now, a projector can't be any higher. The difference in angle between the projector and the screen can only be so much. Beyond that, it's going to start rejecting it. And here's the key thing, that the viewing angle of the people has to be equal to the projection angle, because it's like a billiard ball, right? So the projector shines light at one angle, and at an equal angle, it shines back onto the viewers. Now there's a range there, because people at the front of the room are looking at the screen at a different angle than people at the back of the room. So there is a range there. So, but it's really important to understand that it really kind of determines where the projector is going to be, how far it's going to be, determined by the incident angle and the reflection angle. But these screens are amazing. They really deepen the color depth and the contrast ratio, and they can be usable in full sunlight. Now, if you have a dark room, you don't need to spend the money on that kind of technology for a screen, right? But you do want to make sure you get the right screen so that you get the proper viewing angle from left to right. Now, as we think about, not everybody needs a projection screen. The room may not be big enough. You may not be interested in showing the kind of things that projection screens are really excel at. For instance, if you want to use your sanctuary for movie night, you don't want to be seeing, smaller screens on the sides of the sanctuary. You want a nice big screen in front, right? So that's an application where you would want to have a projection screen versus smaller screens on the sides, or maybe you want to have both. Smaller screens on flat screens do have one issue that these projection screens overcome, and that is ambient light reflections or glares, right? So just to give an example here, let me just pull up another picture. It's around here somewhere. Oh, it's not there. It is here. Right. So here's a picture of a fellow standing in front of a flat panel TV with a window to the side, and you can see all of that light that's reflecting off of the flat panel, creating glare, and that's going to make any image on that screen really hard to see. That is the reason that the ambient light projection screens were made. Now, depending on the type of glass that's used on your television set and the filtering and the technology that's behind the glass, it may not reflect as much light as that screen, but you really can't know that. This is not a specification that many television or monitor producers, manufacturers print on their spec sheets. And so it's kind of an unknown until you get it, unless you can go into a showroom and see it, or go into another facility that's using it and check it out there. Is another consideration.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that you didn't touch on, I know you were trying to stay on topic, but just for anybody who hasn't really messed with it, when he's talking about these angles and angles for you're also not talking about And again, just adding, because something to think about is now you're getting to a factor where you're keystoning that image, and you got to correct for that, which also causes difference down in the video quality in the end product, and also the lumens you're getting because of that keystoning. So those are other factors that need to be considered. A question I have for everybody in the group here, I do installations kind of on a side, so it's not my main bread and butter, but I have never done a double stack projector in any venue. Has anybody had that as an option where they double stacked it so they can get a cheaper end projector, but get double the lumens out of it, so they can get a brighter image essentially? Is that ever been done in the church side? And I can see the pros and cons to this.
Yeah, I haven't used that. Do you find that there is an economic advantage to buying two lesser expensive projectors, or two projectors with a lower light output than one with a higher output?
So, yes and no. So for me, sometimes the price tag of, let's say, a 10K or 20K is a little high, right? If you can get, and depending on the software you're using versus the projectors you're using, there's always kind of workarounds, right? But if you can get an 8K projector that has that's able to stack on each other, right? Whether it's in the roof or on scaffolding or in a room somewhere that's projecting out, you can get double the lumens out of it that way, and now you have kind of a redundancy, right? So now you can say, hey, if one goes out, the other one can still go through. So you have a redundancy, so that essentially you never lose an image, and then you have the ability to get now a higher quality stuff with a cheaper projector. Sometimes, or like with Panasonic, for example, and this again is on the higher side of like 15, 20s, 25s, you can get two 10Ks for less than a 15, or for about the price of the 15, and then essentially you're getting not true 20 lumens out, because you can never really truly double that, even though it feels like you can because you have two 10s. You're getting like 18 and 19 because it's not a true 20. But it's a way to get more lumens out of a projector, and sometimes these are cost effective. On the lower end, where you're looking at 800 lumens or 500 lumens, on that end, you're gonna have to rely on the software to kind of do that for you at some point. Yes, you want to do it optically to get as best as possible, but you're also fighting other factors at that point of, okay, well, how close to center to my screen can I get it without being in the way of everybody? Will these be able to stack and mount to each other? Is the software going to be able to do that? Is there someone competent enough to adjust these if when they do get out of alignment, because you have to do pixel mapping now?
Background noise levels. There's a whole variety of things. I think most churches would not be able to afford the technician time to actually do the registration accurately, so you get a decent image, and that registration isn't going to stick long enough. There's going to be vibrations and stuff that are going to knock the registration out. So they'll be tuning it constantly and cursing you rather than saying, "Wow, that worked out really well." I agree.
Stay with one.
So
and it's going to be a nightmare to get up there. Period.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you're already looking at beasts. I mean, these projectors are big. You already are, finding your perfect mount, finding your perfect place, making sure it's not in the way. One reason people go with ultra narrow bezel displays sometimes, where are we going to put the projector? Sometimes there's nowhere to hang it, much less hang two. And you are going to look at vibration issues. The only time I've seen people stack them is when they absolutely positively need redundancy. And that is in federal government applications typically, or high-end corporate.
I'm trying to remember if we did redundancy at Avid when we put in their building. I can't remember.
So I just want to throw out there are
issues.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, heat's definitely an issue. There are hardware / software solutions for that you can install, so that it does it for you. Essentially, you turn it on, it does. It's these photographs of flashing black and white bars vertically and then horizontally, and then it realigns everything for you. There are options like that. An affordable one would be like Lightform as an example of that you could buy and do that. There's a couple other flavors of it depending on your projectors. But I do agree, yeah, it does take a little bit of a more skilled hand to do it. Even implementing those software versions or hardware that kind of do it for you, the initial getting up and running and doing it properly still takes a little bit of I don't say learning curve, but a little bit of an extra step to make sure it gets done properly.
Yeah, absolutely. And
a really good camera to watch what the software is doing to the projectors for the alignment.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. It's like you end up saving money here, but then you spend the money over here. So yeah. Again, and I was just curious if anybody had been doing anything like that. I know maybe some of the bigger churches that have dedicated AV teams. We got one here that does a dedicated team with a buddy of mine. So I know they do something like that. They also incorporate a lot of LED walls to kind of offset the need for some lighting stuff on the background.
Yeah, no, I haven't done any doubles. I've done singles. Here's a picture of one that I did at a church not too long ago. This is it's a really big screen. It was like a 180-inch screen. The projector is a 10,000 lumen project. No, 7,000 lumen projector at about 60 feet back up in the balcony. And there are LED lights that are behind the screen so that illuminate the wall, which can alleviate some eye strain. They're optional. They can turn them on or off. They just happen to be on for this picture. And this one worked out really well. They had there's this cove in here for the sanctuary, for the pulpit and the chancel area, which made kind of a dark area, which was really nice. Although we did use a ambient light rejecting screen, so the natural color of this is like a silver gray. And that matches the color of the wall. We painted the wall the same color as the natural screen so that it kind of blends in when there's no picture on the screen. The wall looks like it's just one solid wall. And that was kind of interesting.
One of the biggest issues with this, particularly for certain buildings, they've gone from when people left 18 months ago, there was no technology in the room, or there's very little technology, and they're going to come back to find a natural change. And Michael was talking about, that he projects the whole of the Zoom call into the room, and we're seeing exactly the same. I recently, I think I shared a picture with you, Marty. I haven't got it to hand. We put on one synagogue. We've put 6 screens into the room when there were none. So the first time people are going to go back, they're going to suddenly see 6 screens. Why 6? They wanted the way a synagogue is set up. You can't really have a central projection because there's something already in the center taking up all the space. So we put them on pillars and put them at the back, and you've got the same screens put forward. We went with 75 inches in the corners, then 65s going on the pillars in the front. And there's also some other ones that are facing back to the center. And I think that's going to be a bit of a shock. And we've got to try and, for the first few weeks, I think people are going to really stare at them and go, this is just doing, until they blend in. And I think the other thing you find, particularly with things like when you start getting these 75 or 85 inch screens, this box arrives that just looks enormous in front of you. Then you put it on a wall and it doesn't look as big as you think it's going to look. So I think it is a bit of an interesting thing. I love what you've done on that one there, Marty. Have others seen ways of like not focusing the attention on it and it just gets lost?
What do you mean not focusing attention on it and get lost? Like putting the screen.
Well,
somewhere
it's just how do you make it so that and also there was that discussion earlier. You talked about the screens in particular. How do you make it so that the screens? Can you make the screens disappear? Is that a good thing to do? Do you have to recalibrate when they disappear and they roll them up and take them back down again? How do you make sure that that some people who are a bit technophobic aren't presented, or is there just no way around that?
There's some great screen technology out there. There's a company that has a screen that it'll drop the roller up to 16 feet out of the housing, and this is the key. It's quiet enough so you can do it during services. And then it will reverse roll out once it's down, and you put it onto parachute. It's on parachute cabling so that you can get it to match the wall. And they do this, and I've done it in a lot of house of worship applications, because they don't want to cover up the beautiful stained glass windows or whatever might be on that wall. They just want them to come down when they need them, but they needed them to be quiet enough and non-obtrusive enough. And certain applications, they won't be able to do it because we all know ceilings can be an issue to drop things from in a house of worship application. But that's a good solution, the 0G screen, because it will drop so far out of the housing and then drop down. It literally looks like it's just hanging in space. And you can put it up and down because it's quiet enough. But there's a lot of solutions like that out there for those types of displays, for projection. I mean, that's one I happen to know of.
There are certainly some really tough sanctuaries to try and figure out where to put screens. I mean, here's one. This is an older traditional church with a curved chancel area, raised pulpit with very thin area on the sides between the balcony and the edge of the curve. There's like really no place to put a nice big screen except over the beautiful back wall of the pulpit, and it would be a crime to try to hide that, really, right?
So Marty, sorry, I don't mean to cut you up. Something you had said earlier when you painted the wall gray, which I thought was fantastic. It got me thinking about, there's a gentleman named Luke McElroy. I don't know if anybody's ever heard this guy. He's big in the church. He's kind of coined his own version of projection mapping, calls it environmental mapping, but big in the church side. That picture you just showed us, assuming that the painting can be changed. And again, I don't know if anybody's doing this. And again, the initial setup would be complicated, but if you just get a projector that overshot that area, right, and you got a simple program like MadMap or Pro Video Player or Pro Presenter that would do this as well, you could map that content to play in between those pillars and then use that existing infrastructure as your content area, right? That would, you would keep the beautiful wall. You could do it in gray, it'd be even better. But let's say you couldn't, you could probably put more money into the projector. Put the software so that it's just, all you're doing is masking those areas, right? I know Pro Video Player is pretty huge, and I've done a lot of stuff with it. MadMap is another option as well. And you can just NDI, or you can siphon in your content to just spit it out, and it's very low requirement to kind of keep it going. Has anybody done anything like that? That's in the group where they've mapped essentially the existing building to just get the content out there, and so now they're creating pips within pips so that they're using what's there instead of adding all this other content, and they can invest more into the output of the projector side and the software essentially, so that it's just like, hey, throw your content up, it'll always be right there. And then here's some presets, right, using either Stream Deck or macros or whatever your switcher's going to use to say, okay, this is, if it's in the center, you want it to go to the side, you take the whole wall up, you hit this button and it does all this. And this, doesn't require anything on the post side or during show. Once it's set up, it runs. Essentially, as long as the projector never gets moved, which is its installation, so it shouldn't, everything would essentially be the same. And even if you need to train somebody, it would be very minute. Hey, this is a mask. All you're doing is masking these pillars out here. Everything else is going to line up because it's projected to fill that space.
Yeah, that's a really interesting idea, using image mapping or sectioning. So so you could use that center section of the wall and the two sections on either side of it. It would essentially be one big projection image size,
Correct.
right?
Yep.
With the different image panes between
Correct.
the pillars. That's a very interesting idea.
Yeah, and you can use a bunch of different ways to make it happen, but then you can create different, essentially pips, right? So that the background could be a constant image of something, and then the pip that comes. So like that for that in my, like, just looking at this right now, I would buy like a generic, a cloud background, right? So the projector turns on, right? Go into settings so it doesn't go to black or blue, so it just turns on and goes to nothing. Unless there's an image, it goes to black, right? And then maybe you fade into like a cloud background, and then when either the iMag needs to come up or the music needs to come up in an alpha channel, now in the center there that comes up, right? And that's a pip that's been created there, and you're just pushing it through, let's say, Pro Presenter. And it's already been masked.
You mean picture in picture. So you're just talking about multiple pictures, picture frames. Like we do that. We can do that really inexpensively in OBS. We can create, bring in multiple VMix, pictures, multiple images, and this, like you have me and this picture here that you're looking at right now. It's a picture in picture. It's two pictures in one, composited into one image. Yep. And that brings to mind something else I used a few years ago. If you have a smooth wall that's big enough, you can get a product called Screen Goo that is a paint. It's actually a multi-layer system of paint that finishes off your wall with the quality of a projection screen. And you can get it in whites to grays, and it works really well. And it's so much less. I mean, that screen that I showed you in the church that I put up, the ambient light, that was like a $5,000 screen at that size. And Screen Goo would cost you a few $100s, and you paint it on yourself. Now you've got to do some wall preparation. You've got to make sure that it's sanded really nice and smooth. You don't want to have any lumps or bumps because that's going to distort the image. But you do some wall preparation, and there are instructions that come with it. And then there's a base layer, a second layer, and I think a third layer, depending on which coating that you want to have. And that's a way that you can use, if you have a nice big wall, you can use that. Now, lots of people, I've seen like this, the church that I was just showing with the pink walls, I've seen them just use that wall for projection. And, if it's just lyrics or text, that's fine. But if you're showing any kind of video where color is important, of course, your whites are going to be pinks, and your reds are going to be something else, and your greens are going to be purple. Your blues are going to be purple. But, so having a color rendition important, you want to have a white screen or a dark screen, something that is color neutral. So I also wanted to talk about, we have, Leo did a church where he put up 6 different screens around the room. Some of them were.
Just got a picture up that I can show you there, Marty.
Yeah. I wanted to
So
see that picture.
this is the one that I was talking about. So as you can see, obviously you're looking at the front. I'm looking from the back, and you can see I don't know if I can zoom in on this. Actually, I shouldn't have done it this way. But you can look at the screens are on the pillars, and they're at the back there. But the other thing that we did, and I think this is quite a good one. This is a slightly different way. This is laser projectors. There's 2 laser projectors. The walls are Jerusalem stone. So they're actually stone walls. But this is quite a modern synagogue that was built. And it's, as you can see, if you just look to the sides, it's quite dark in there. So it's almost, you could argue, it's almost studio style lighting or stage style lighting. So they actually are projecting. If I roll the video forward, I don't know if you're going to see much. It may jump to something else, but you can see that they project onto those walls, and you can't see the rest. But that's actually been a really interesting thing. They looked at a load of different projectors, and I think it's because of the lighting in there. They were able to get away with not the most expensive projectors because they just had the walls. But it's a fascinating thing, because the minute the projectors is off, going back to what Omar was saying, in a way, the minute those projectors are off, they're gone. There's nothing to show apart from the lovely Jerusalem stone.
Yeah, and honestly, building a queue so that when they pop on, those backlights at the bottom turned off. I mean, that would definitely up the.
That's a really good point. Actually, they could do that. Yeah. So we take them off.
That's exactly what I was talking about. Exactly what they did there is what I'm talking about. Just using that, what's existing there, because a lot of the churches, that focal point is very beautifully done. It's very well crafted. There's always some kind of significance at an area. Why don't we use that to our advantage then, and just mask out what needs to be masked out and project to the side, so that we, where people are looking already, it's just now an additional piece of content for them to say, okay, here's the lyrics, or here's the songs, or here's the close up, or here's the people viewing on the world, whatever that is, using what's already pre-existing there. And a lot of the times it's always like a stage, right? So it's like they're not all this exact model, but it's always kind of the walls and then a backdrop and a stage for them to be in, right? So it's either you project there or onto the sides there, and instead of reinventing the wheel, just use what's existing there and be more creative on that, on the back end of what you're shooting out of the projectors. And I mean, these are just my thoughts, obviously.
Yeah, no, beautiful. Yeah, the Jerusalem stone is a really nice neutral color, fairly white stone, and it's fairly smooth, but not really smooth. I mean, if you remember the picture and you look under the screen near the floor where the uplights were, you could see that it has a rough texture, but it's not so rough like brick that you're going to see lines and extrusions and things that are going to disturb the image. But you also noticed, and maybe this was just because the uplights were on, but the color density and the contrast ratio wasn't quite as good as you would get on a projection screen or a flat panel.
100%.
But it's such a beautiful use of the space and the resource that, that compromise may well be worth it.
Yeah, no,
So,
and you make a good point, right? It's like now the trade-off is we can give you this still beautiful setup where we just put some content up there. The downside or the caveat is like, right, we could do this small content, small font sizes, small text stuff may not be as legible because it's not on a proper surface, right? And those are some of the trade-offs that maybe they're willing to make.
Like printing on parchment versus photocopier paper.
yeah, you use
That's a
larger
perfect
text.
example.
Use larger text, right?
Right, use larger
So-
But
text.
it's also as you said there, Omar, which is really important, is you don't need to take the whole of the lyrics of something and put the whole lot up. Just put up a paragraph or put up one verse and then change it because people aren't reading that fast anyway. So you don't necessarily need it all up there. So that you use the, and I think also I also think is really going to be important in doing this stuff on the projectors. And I'm not that it wasn't the best example of it. I've seen better examples where what they put up is much more subtle rather than it's just like a straight PowerPoint bang in your face. Because I think you need to create it. It needs to how you move between each page is quite important so that it doesn't look fast moving because I just think that doesn't quite work in big projector environments. So that's my experience.
So we may have a projector in the back of the room. We may have two projectors, whether they be in the back of the room or near the front of the room. I would imagine that those two projectors, Leo, were how far back from the walls were those projectors? Maybe 20 feet?
No. They're more about 40, 50 feet. It's a
40, 50 feet.
big
So they were on
place.
the sides of the room.
It's a semicircular in building. So the whole thing. That synagogue holds sits around about 1,000.
Mm-hmm.
So and they in a normal environment, and they're sitting on the balcony, pointing down. So
Cool. So there was a question that I just wanted to touch on, and that was about rear screen projection. Rear screen projection is a way to have the projector behind the screen. So in a typical, well, actually not. In a movie theater, projectors are always at the back, usually at the back of the room, projecting on the front of the screen. But if you go into many museums or other kinds of exhibits, you may have a screen and not see any projector. The projector is behind the screen, projecting, and the screen is translucent. Not transparent because you'd be able to see through it, but it's translucent and you see the image that's being projected from the back of the screen. That requires a suitable space for you to put the projector behind the screen at a suitable distance, and the kind of lens that would expand that image to the size of the screen you want. Those kinds of screens tend to be more expensive. The projector and the setup and the lenses tend to be more expensive as well. But it is a really interesting technology that's been used for a long time. There's another way to do this. There are projectors called ultra short throw projectors. And these are typically used in conference rooms and classrooms, kind of smaller rooms, where the projector can be 1 to 3 feet away from the screen, mounted above it, either on an arm or on the ceiling. And it uses a mirroring system. So the projector can actually be pointed down at the floor, and then there's a mirror under it that reflects it onto the screen. There are a couple of different ways that these are done, but if you don't have a way to mount the projector at the back of the room, or under certain other circumstances, this could be a way to use a video projector and have it right at the front with the screen.
See, that was an interesting one, because we were thinking about that for that venue, because you could put it on the floor and project it up. I've seen a lot of these. I know that Costco in the UK had them recently, these new 4K short throw projectors. And it, as you say, because of the way that they're working now, and because of the technology, the projector can be much closer. Because I think we're all appreciative that most churches, typically the back wall is quite a distance, because you will typically sit, well, not always, but a long time, you normally sit in the room is set up where you're lengthways rather than widthways on the room. But it all depends.
So there's an interesting thing that gets done with those projectors in particular. I've never done this for a church, but if you ever go to an expo and you see kind of like the new look, and I was going to draw this out, but the new look is like this, right? Everybody's watching a phone, or this portrait mode. An interesting track, because of that ultra short throw distance, whether it's the projector is internal or the lens that you get, which is an external. That ultra short throw, because it's usually 3 feet out by 1 foot or 3 feet out by 5 feet up. You can put them in a box and create a lot of imagery, so that if you're in a bright room and you don't have an option, you can now put them in a box, because now you have this short distance where you can put the projector in there, you get rear projection, so now you get this nice bright image. The whole room is blacked out, and you put a stand with a projector in there. On the expo sides, if you see those, sometimes they're just looks like a picture frame, but it's showing content. Sometimes what's in there is just a stand with a laptop plugged into HDMI with a projector. A guy can go in there because it's 3 feet deep. You can put the content up there, walk in there whenever he needs to, close this back door. It's a super dark room, projector's shooting fully out, and you get a rear projection screen or a dual vision screen, which can be either front or rear. And these are kind of little tricks you can do to really push the envelope on what the lumens is doing, because it's in this darker room and it's being projected outwards.
And
so that's
because it's only a few feet away from the screen, it doesn't have to be such a strong lamp.
Correct.
Yeah.
This is a time check. We're 7 minutes away from the 90-minute show length.
All right. So there's one other thing I wanted to cover. So we may have 1 or 2 projectors, or we may have 6 flat screens in the front of the room or distributed around the room. How do we get signal to them? We have a video switcher at the back of the room, and we're doing streaming. So we're sending video and audio out, and we have these displays of various technologies in the room. How do we distribute the video to get image to these screens?
Witchcraft.
Witchcraft. Well, that's one option, I suppose.
We should call it Matrix. That'd be awesome.
Yeah. So, most of these have HDMI inputs, but HDMI can only, go so far. And they have, a number of issues or potential fallacies or things that don't always work quite well with HDMI. None of these monitors, only the very expensive studio monitors might have SDI inputs. But these switches, generally have HDMI outputs, or if it's a software switcher, you're working from a computer. So what are the different ways that we can get signal to them?
Don't forget HD base T. Most higher end projectors are using HD base T as one of their primary ingests.
So what can you tell us about that? How does that work?
HD base T is really just a technology that takes advantage of category cabling to transport signals, primarily audio and video signals. there's any number of people making HDMI to HD base T converters so that you can send the signal up a piece of category cable and into the projector. There's also a number of manufacturers that are making switchers that are natively HD base T. Extron, Crestron, et cetera. They're all making HD base T versions of their products. So for the purposes of this group, it will probably end up being something on the order of a small converter device that goes from HDMI to HD base T to send it up there. But it is a great option for lesser expensive cabling to get to the location, and it can go over pretty long distances compared to HDMI.
I agree with Mark wholeheartedly, by the way. But one other really unique product that showed up on the market a few years ago are the hybrid HDMI cables that are plenum rated, so you can throw them in the ceiling. You can go up to 100 meters. That way you don't have to, give them a boost or power them. They power from one end, which is wonderful. And they're now doing 8K. So that's always a possible solution. And if not, Mark's, in my opinion, correct. Transcode it into a HD base T and send it on a cheap cable.
And Sharon, just to verify, the ones you're talking about are the ones that are directional only, right? So it's source on one end, output on the other end.
And I have plugged them in the wrong direction many times. Everyone has.
Everybody has. You're like, oh, wait a minute, is this? Damn it! It's one of these cables.
Source. Yeah.
It's kind of it's an optical cable, isn't it, or it's an amplified cable?
Well, yeah. So they usually have a pin somewhere. So HDMI, if you guys look up a book called HDMI Uncensored, it's a full breakdown of this. HDMI at 50 feet, what's called the eye, right? That digital, it collapses. So most cables will have some kind of repeater or built into it, because HDMI will pass power through it. At 50 feet, it'll get resynced and repowered, or not repowered, but resynced, and the power will then keep going down the line. And that's why it becomes directional.
Marty, can I just mention one other thing before our 3 minutes is up? Because I think it's just super interesting for this market specifically, because I think we all run into issues with where am I going to put that massive projector? Sometimes you just cannot find a place to put it because of line of sight issues. And there is new technology out by several manufacturers right now where they are removing the guts, the light engine, the power, and all of that is you're going to rack that. You can go up to 100 meters away and you umbilic it and use an umbilical cord to come to the head of the projector. So instead of a 200-pound projector, you can have a 20 or a 40 or a 60-pound head, and you can bring in 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 lumens to that head. So it's just interesting for this market specifically, when we run into issues, where am I going to hang that projector? There is new technology out on the street that's going to help.
Is that a light guide, fat fiber? What's the technology? Is it a light guide, a fat fiber? What?
It's called satellite projectors, and they've actually separated them out.
Yeah, look at digital projection was like
digitalprojection.com.
Yeah, they're like the founding fathers.
But to bring it back to the
and you can also sorry, go ahead.
No, but to bring it back to the topic of wiring to these displays, we mentioned HD base T. There are HDMI to Cat5 balance, so extenders, right? Which is not quite the same as HD base T, but similar in concept, where you have a small box at the source end where it's called a sender or transmitter, and then you have a receiver at each of the displays, and it's a one-to-one connection. HD base T is also a one-to-one connection. There's a transmitter and there's a receiver, although the transmitter can be built into a switcher where you'd have several transmitters built into one unit. And so you would have a number of outputs. Each output would go to a separate display. There's also a technology called NDI, which is a lot more computer friendly if you're using a software switcher. And depending on the switcher that you're using, NDI is generated in the computer, and it travels over not just Cat5 wire, but actual Ethernet switches, so it can travel over your facility's network. And you can get $150 converter that would go behind each of the displays that would turn it into an HDMI signal for input to your monitors. And that's capable of any number of channels, which is important in this context because think about the kind of video that you're generating. There's one video that's going out to the stream for people at home. There's video that you're showing to the congregation at the front of the room, and they may not be the same images. You don't necessarily want to show the people in the room everything that you're streaming out. It's just different audience. It's not appropriate. Then you have screens for the people who are conducting the worship service. And they may want to see the same images that the congregation is seeing so that they know what the congregation is seeing, but they also may want to see their text, the sermon, the readings, the announcements, anything that they're speaking from the pulpit. They may want to see that text on a screen that only they can see, which is what we refer to as teleprompting. So that is, you think about that, now you have 3 different images that you need to generate for 3 different kinds of screens. And that gets a little tricky because you've got to control 3 different screens. You're switching video for 3 different outputs. And if you're going to do that, you could do that with 3 different hardware switchers, and you'd have to figure out how to get inputs to all 3. You can get a larger hardware switcher that has 3 different outputs. It's more money. You can do it from a software switcher. Some software switchers you can get as many outputs as you want. And if you're using NDI, then you don't need any output converters, which makes it very economical to do. And everything gets traveled over the network, and at the screen, you convert it. And then you have a software panel where you can determine what images or what video channels you want to show at each of these screens. So you could have screens out in your lobby, you can have screens down in the kitchen or in the RE room, in the fellowship hall, and you can determine what you're showing on each of those screens. So that's the opportunities that NDI present as a way to distribute video.
One of the things I'd say, I know we're really close on time, but one of the things I just want to mention briefly, and going back to when we talk about Zoom, if you think about if you end up projecting what's actually happening in front of you onto your screens, what you can end up having a problem with is sync. It's not by much, but if I'm sitting here and I'm on a big screen, I'm in front of you, and there's a big screen of me, and that big screen, whatever you want to do, and even, particularly if you start using things like NDI as well, you'll find that is going to be out of sync, and people are going to be distracted because it's there. So just be aware of what you're trying to do and how you're going to do it. Also, in the one that I showed earlier, which I have, I've actually zoomed in slightly on this one. I can now zoom in. So this is the one where I said to you before that there is actually 6 screens. They've actually got, I'm on the wrong thing, but you can see the screens are up there. If you look, there's 2 of the screens are actually facing back, but they wanted the same picture on all. And what we did is we did it with SDI. I've talked about these before. These are SDI converters. So you bring in, the HDMI comes out of your computer, and then you run it in SDI out around the room. But the SDI, as it hits one, you can then daisy chain them to the other, which means that the picture is absolutely the same. And these little boxes actually will power directly off the back of any modern screen because they just power on USB. So you don't have to, all you have to do is run the SDI to the screen. So it's quite cost effective in delivering it. But do remember, sometimes the most distracting thing you can put up on the screen is either that, and then the second most is what's actually in front of you. And the second most distractive thing that you can put up in front of worshippers is a load of people sitting at home picking their noses.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, I was going to ask you, Leo, how you were distributing around that particular room. Thanks for bringing that
Yeah,
up.
it's SDI with a very simple. So we've got an SDI repeater, and then it goes around, and we wanted it. From my experience, SDI is pretty rock solid. It just once it's in and it's connected, the connectors don't fall out. With HDMI, you're always sitting there worried that they're going to fall out. SDI, once it's in and connected, it should never. It shouldn't. The cable shouldn't deteriorate.
Integrators still curse HDMI connectors. They drip
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. Well, with the content protection and the handshaking and the display resolution negotiating, there's a lot of chatter that happens when an HDMI connection establishes itself or before you see a picture. There's a lot of data that goes back and forth, error checking, talking. Hi there, how are you? I'm fine. I'm going to send out this resolution. Can you handle it? No, I can't handle that resolution. I need this one. And okay, I'll try that one for you. How's that? Okay, yeah, that's good. I got it. Let's show a picture.
And a lot of failure,
Yeah, and a lot of
especially after
failure.
you pull them out 100 times, they're going to
Yeah.
fail.
The number of times that we get accused of our control software not being responsive enough, it turns out it's the switcher and the display negotiating with one another. It's like, that's as fast as it's going to switch. I'm sorry. It's, you chose that switcher, that's what you're going to get,
Whereas SDI is a digital video technology that has none of this negotiation. There's no content protection. It's just analog to digital or digital to digital if you're going from HDMI to SDI and to the other end. And it's
the one thing that throws SDI quite often is particularly on computers which go and change their screen resolutions or change things there, because SDI it likes to stay at one resolution. And if you haven't bought the right converters, you can get caught out because they won't go up to the speed of certain resolutions.
And protected content won't pass certain boundaries.
Well, you didn't hear this from me, but obviously the cheap ones that you buy, the cheap Chinese ones, seem to strip that out, Mark. So, but rather than the expensive ones, but I don't know why that happens.
Gee, I wonder.
Yeah, there still is that HDMI handshaking between the source and those little boxes, especially the sender box, because that sender box is actually a receiver for the HDMI cable.
I mean, we could go on this in long detail, but if you are going to do it, one of the really nice ways of doing it is that certain Blackmagic cards, you can get an SDI card out. So if you go with a software switcher and then go back to what you were talking about, then you can drive all of those channels completely differently in from your software switcher, particularly vMix. I think, in my experience, vMix is better than OBS in doing this.
Yeah, because vMix has the option of many output channels, video output channels, whereas OBS is maybe 2. But putting those the SDI multi-output cards in the chassis would have to be a tower computer or an external interface box that allows those SDI, the PCIe cards?
Yeah. The Decklink PCIe cards.
Right.
So the question now is anybody other than the panel of geeks still awake?
Yeah, there are people there. There's 16 people there.
Brian,
well, I think we should close out first, and we can open up the mics.
So here it is. So I want to thank our panelists and our guest stars today, Omar and Sharon. Thank you very much. That's it for tonight's official show. I want to thank you all and our guests for such a wonderful conversation. We hope you've all enjoyed our time together. Perhaps you found it informative, enlightening, enriching, energizing, and motivating. Watch the Discord for upcoming shows where you can find the links to past recordings, announcements about upcoming shows. And, I say this is fairly new ground for all of us, for, churches that have never streamed before, never have had to worry about this technology. It's all new ground. But you can make it your own because there are no models to follow and nothing you need to emulate. So We'll see you in 2 weeks. Thank you very much. And now we'll move into the post show.